Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining today. I'd like to call the Flood Diversion Finance Committee to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
I'm here.
Mr. Costin? Ms. Johnson?
Here.
Ms. McCall?
Here.
Mr. Olson?
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Here.
Mr. Steen?
Here.
Mr. Gehrig? Mr. Redlinger?
Here.
Dr. Mahoney? Mr. Grinberg?
I'm assuming we have a quorum. That. Next item on the agenda would be approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Motion and approved. Any comments or changes? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Same sign. Thank you. Minutes are approved. Approval of the bills. I think we have in front of us bills totaling, I got that somewhere here, $233,576.70. Any questions on the bills? Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you, Chairman Steen. This isn't any different than the packet we received, right? It's not been amended in any way?
It's not.
Perfect, thank you.
Any questions on the bills or a motion to approve?
So move.
The motion, is there a second?
Second?
Motion is second. Any discussion on the motion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Moving on to number 4, financial report. Kent is not available. Mike, would you be able to step in and
Sure.
do your best? Thank you.
If you look on page 13, for 2019, we've taken in $4 million in revenue and spent $1.3 million, which is a good sign. Cumulative, we've taken in $542.8 million and have spent $455 million. If you go to the next page, our financial position, we have a net financial position of $87,789,997. And on page 15, it's our budget for the first quarter. And we have the outstanding encumbrances, and that is showing, and that's why we show a negative, that we show a negative as far as what the financial position is on the budget. The outstanding encumbrances are all the work orders and stuff that have been approved that haven't been expended yet.
Mike, I have just a quick question for you. 1 month through the first quarter, and maybe if Mr. Montplaisir can answer it, maybe one of our co-EDs could, but for the approved budget for the quarter, we got $8,479,000. We've already collected $4,384,000, if I'm not mistaken. So are we going to be significantly over that budget item for the quarter, or do we have an aberration month 1? I'm just curious what's going on there.
Are you talking about the revenues?
The revenue on page 15, yes. I'm sorry.
Well, the revenue is our normal tax payments that we received, and I'm not sure how they put in the budget figures for the revenue, but, we're taking in just about $4 million on tax revenue, and then we took in $227,000 from the state.
So we're probably going to be over that quarterly budget then on the revenue side, I'm
We
guessing.
probably will,
Okay,
yes.
all right.
I think they just put in an amount to balance the expenditure proposal.
All right. Okay, thank you.
And then the following pages are just a summary of expenses for this first month.
Any questions on the financial report? Pretty short and sweet this month. Any questions? Just a motion to accept and file, if we could. Someone make a motion?
Move to receive and file.
Second.
Second. Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. PMC report, Mr. Nicholson.
There's actually an X on the floor right here, just in case. Tells you where to stand. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the PMC report starts on page 29 with the overall program status, and you'll note that consistent with previous direction, the overall program status is now statused against the 2.75 program budget in 2018 dollars, cost estimate in 2018 dollars. And so the program status shows by work breakdown structure what the costs are, report totals of the budget 2.75, actual cost to date 445,000 or 445,513,944, remaining program budget of approximately $2.3 billion. Those numbers match the numbers that are shown in Kent's financial report. The following page, starting on page 30, is what we call the level 2 detail that make up the detail behind those numbers. And that's from page 30 and 31. And then on page 32, again, you have the actual cost to date against the full budget. Page 33 is the 2019 cash budget. And as you pointed out, Mr. Steen, the cash budget is against the Q1 budget. I believe we've had conversations that until we have better clarity on a path forward, we'll remain in the Q1 budget status until we know more about the stand-up process. Starting on page 34 is the level 2 detail for that cash budget and how those expenditures are laid out by line item. And that concludes the report.
Okay. Any questions on the PMC report for Mr. Nicholson at this point? Hearing none. Can I get a motion to receive and file?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Any questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Contracting actions. Who's going to be presenting on the contracting actions? Martin. I'm going to suggest, I went through these unless there's some objection, to basically go through all four and then take a motion covering all four of those at the same time, if that's all right with everybody? All right. Thank you, Mark. Go ahead.
Okay, on page 38, there are two contracting actions from a construction cost estimate perspective. Work package 42E for a negative $240,636.15 for removing some overlap work items from the contract and adding some pipe cradles, foundation debris removal, and gate well structural fill with IBI contractor. And the second one is work package 43CD, the OHB ring levy phases C and D, change order number 6, which is to balance some unit quantities, adding some changes and add some contract time for $203,981.64. Both of these have been through TAG and also the co-EDs with respect to recommendations to move forward with those change orders. The following page, page 39, shows task order amendments, both for Houston Moore Group, task order 25, amendment 2, for scope and budget on phase 9 H&H modeling tasks and extending the period of performance, a total of 194,816, and task order 26, amendment 1, to support work-in-kind projects for adding budget for the Southern Embankment local drainage, transportation, utility updates, and scope and budget for design reviews, and also extending the period of performance to December 31st, 2019. Total on that one is 541,306 for a grand total of 736,122. And those are the action, those are the contracting actions that take action by the Finance Committee and Board. The following page has co-executive director approved task order amendments. Those are for information, which would be for boundary survey services, again for Houston Moore Group, adding scope and budget for mobility improvement parcel surveys, 47 of them, and extending period of performance in the amount of $103,000. So the ones in green on pages 38 and 39 are the ones that would require action by the Finance Committee and ultimately by the Board.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Nicholson on the contracting actions? If not, we'd look for a motion to recommend approval to the board.
So move.
Second.
Motion is second. Any questions on the motion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to number 7 and 8, and I'll just let you take those in order, because I don't think we really need to take any action, do we? It's just information. Mr. Redlinger, if you would take 7 and 8 on labor rates.
Yes, and action will be requested of the Finance Committee, and this will roll up in the committee report to the board tomorrow. I direct your page to page 67 in your packet. I will start first with the HMG rates, and I think this is a good summary page that includes a history of those rates over time. The current MSA with HMG provides that a 3.5% rate increase on average can be sought by the provider. And so this is part of an annual adjustment where the provider is looking at specific rate classes, and that level of detail is also in your packet, and then determining what specific positions the provider would like to adjust. So you'll see a variety of percentages in that table that's presented to you. However, that all blends out to being less than 3.5%. The current MSA provides for only an average of 3.5%. So if it did average out to be 4 or 4.5, we would go back and we'd correct that. So these are consistent with the MSA as well as the budget. Funds are contained in the 2019 budget to fund these rate increases, and so these are allowable expenses. And we have, as the co-executive directors, have reviewed these rates and find them to be reasonable and consistent with that MSA. And I can take the Jacobs rates as well at the same time. Again, a similar story. The PMC is permitted, and its sub, AE2S, is permitted to receive up to a 3% rate adjustment. This is a bit of a different story in that the PMC is seeking to adjust rates on Task Order 4, which is the Property Acquisition and Management Services Task Order, and adjust that task order, but not adjust the other outstanding work, such as Task Order 2. That is one that would remain the same. But again, the same story applying here. In this case, the PMC is provided up to a 3% allowance, unlike the designer that has 3.5. And these, again, are also consistent with your budget that's been approved. And we've all reviewed this as well and find them to be reasonable requests that we support. So these can be taken together.
We are looking for a motion to recommend approval. Okay.
Yep, and that will be on the board agenda as well. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Mike, how does this, if we tried to do a comparison of county or city rates, how do these compare to those rates? Are these higher or lower than our average rate?
well, I think there's different considerations. It's a great question. Thank you, Mayor. It's a different consideration in the private sector compared to government, because you're not talking about a government COLA as you think about employee costs of a government employee. In this case, the firms have different requirements. In the case of HMG in particular, they have to carry what is called a professional liability insurance policy, as would the others. And there are just some different considerations, different inflationary factors. I do know, and I can speak to AE2S, they did provide some good background about who they do compare to. They're going to listservs and indexes of other private providers and what they're doing and trying to find comparability there. And in that case, yes, it's very consistent. When you actually look at how they review their rates, they're going out to I'll just name a few of these specific organizations. Industry data from PSMJ, Zwig White, as well as regional engineering firms. And then regarding AE2S, their average annual rate increase of the last 5 years was 2.66% for all AE2S labor categories. So we don't quite compare apples to apples to the government folks, but they do, and we look for rigor in that they're going and looking at other industry providers and looking at other folks just to make sure that we're sort of in market. But they have some different considerations than we do.
Well, my curiosity is if we're doing COLAs in the county and city at 2 or 2.5, we're not at 3 and 3.5. We can't, I mean, local market is doing certain things. I know Sanford went up 3%, but this seems to me higher than a lot of our local issuer competitors at 3.5. And I'm just, we just do that, or we can't tie it to, like, say, local market, what we're seeing in the market?
No, the MSA provides that they can seek the rate if they can justify it and to the client, and that has been the case. And so when data is produced that suggests that, say, in one position, you really need to go secure a 3.2% increase, but then in another one that's not adjusted, we really defer to that data and defer to their expertise there, knowing that they have some other business factors and some considerations on insurance and liability in particular that we don't have in government. So, but that is something that both MSAs provide for. And again, they're just slightly different. The HMG MSA for 3.5% not to exceed, and then the PMC 3.0%.
Just to add to that, on the COLA piece, I'm not sure how the city works, but the county, we have COLA, but we also have steps. And so over a period of many years, you got the COLA increase plus the step increase. And so I'm not sure where that actually compares, but COLA is not the only thing that we end up providing it. And this isn't necessarily all salary increases, this is really cost of doing business increases.
Correct.
So you look at that and compare that to what a city or county does, would your cost of doing business go up this last year? Was it 2%, 1.4%, or 5%? You know that, so it's really not a salary increase for these individuals, it's a cost of business increase across the board.
And I'll just use the last 3 years as an example. On the AE2S side, when you look at all-in costs and the increases passed along to the client, 2017 was a 2.4% increase, 2018 was 2.90%, and then 2019 is 2.93%. So again, you're looking at the average and you're stepping back and looking at all positions and all work.
Chairman. Michael, the supply and demand of the personnel or the resources, does that factor into this too?
Oh, absolutely. There's different market considerations, and I think, certainly defer to the providers too, but, you can look at these labor charts, and I'll just go to the Houston Moore chart in particular. Not all positions, unlike government, where COLA and cost of living adjustments would be, sort of applied with equity across similar positions, and different positions. This is a case where, and I'll just direct you to page 65, and I'll just, pull a couple of positions by way of example. This is a case where, yes, they have determined that a project manager, for example, has to be adjusted by 3.5% to retain market competitiveness, whereas a project manager assistant is only adjusted by 2.99. And we defer to those providers to make that call. Again, in terms of our role here is just simply to maintain compliance to that overall pre-negotiated MSA figure of the 3.5. So in that case, those are market factors that they are weighing. I'll pick out another one down on the construction side. A construction engineer or specialist one only had a $4 rate increase for a total of 2.88%. Clearly, the market, they feel they don't need to adjust and respond commensurately.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Commissioner Peterson.
Chairman Steen, thank you. Mr. Redlinger, I understand everything you've said, but there's something to be said about being handed revenue on an ongoing basis with little debate. There's no marketing costs, and I realize the overhead costs, I ran a pretty big office myself, do go up every year. I guess I really struggle with the 3.5, and again, we're not comparing apples to apples. If we just say to the county we're at 1.5, 2.5, whatever it's going to be, we have different nuances and different aspects of what we do. But I've said this before, and I'll say it again, I struggle when we're in the threes, regardless of what studies and surveys have been done. I think a 2% number is more than sufficient. I think it would cover everything they need to do, but I'll support the recommendation by you and your fellow, but it's just know that I'm struggling with that kind of number.
Any additional comments or questions? If not, a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion to approve.
Is there a second? Is there a second to approve?
Second.
Motion and second. Further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
A reluctant yes, but a yes nonetheless.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes,
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
motion passes. Next item on the agenda is a Plan B budget reporting and update by Mr. Redlinger and Mr. Nicholson, and we are going to, there's some additional handouts that were provided at your seats, if you each have something that looks like this.
Yes, and I'll just set this up, turn it over to Martin too. And first, a big thanks to the PMC for helping put together this material. I think we've had some good discussions with leadership just about expectations in 2019 to try to start looking at some big picture finance themes and looking at tracking our expenditures against the 2.75. That said, there's also been a question about year of expenditures and about the costs, kind of total cost of ownership at the end of the project and at the end of construction. Through 2027. So Martin's going to highlight that, talk about that, but again, I just want to acknowledge some of the inputs we received, not only from the Finance Committee, but other diversion board members, about ideas just to try to kind of track our progress and track how we're doing. And I think those have been really well received, and so I thank people for that. And I'll have Martin just walk through the materials that are prepared here. These are draft materials. We're certainly open to any suggestions or pieces of input that the committee has, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Let's start with the small print bifold, which you can take your pick. You can print this out on 11 by 17 and have a big one, or you can have a small one that looks kind of cool. So we went with the small version. This is a handout that has been used not only in Bismarck but in Washington, D.C. to talk about the project cost estimate and the funding requirements that result from that cost estimate. And it occurred to us that the Finance Committee may not have been formally handed this document, and it is out in public. And so let's start with that document. And in the middle of that, from a cost perspective, is the proposed funding plan, which essentially is, again, around your $2.75 billion 2018 estimate. And one of the reasons why we're talking about 2018 dollars, or present dollars, when we talk about funding, is that the state and the federal government both think about funding in today's dollars. They don't think about the total price that the project is going to cost when you're all through with construction. The analogy I use is much like buying a house. When you buy a house and you get a 30-year mortgage, no one really talks about the price of your house equal to the payments you're going to make over 30 years. They talk about the purchase price of the house, and that's the way it's commonly thought, and that's what you talk to the bank about, and that's how you get your financing done. So in terms of talking about the projects in 2018 dollars, we're going to continue to do that. I think on an annual basis, we will revise the financial plan, and we'll also take a look at where you are statused against those year of expenditure dollars as you move forward through the program. The second piece of paper, which is the graph and the table, is then a look at, if you added up all of the checks the Diversion Authority will write, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will write, and the state of Minnesota will write with respect to all of the construction costs, that would total and be articulated by the graph on top and the table down below, and that total ends up being about $3.16 billion. So if you think of it, it's more like adding up all of your mortgage payments by the time you're done, including cost of inflation, cost of interest, and financing, you'd end up a little over $3.16 billion against a $2.75 billion present-day cost. It's important to keep in mind from a public perspective, this is always based against a $2.75 billion project with the scope that's associated with the $2.75 billion estimate. Even though on an annual basis, moving forward, you'll probably revise your year of expenditure estimate based on current financing costs, where your bids have come in, what your contingency looks like at the moment. So I thought that would be appropriate information to share with the Finance Committee at this time.
Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the important part, I think, is what you said, the last part, was the contingency of $255 million that we have in this number right now. Hopefully, we don't need any of that. Probably we will, right? But there's some substantively large number that we have as you might as wells or just in cases. And again, not to disclude that, but we need to never forget how large that number is.
Yes, and just a word on contingency. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Contingency is in an estimate, particularly for a program like this, to cover two things. Things that you don't know, and things you know from experience will not go as you plan them to go. So most programs spend a healthy part of the contingency because today we have design that ranges from 100% complete, we're waiting for construction, to conceptual designs that are at 10%. And this estimate is based on those designs. Well, we know on a 10% conceptual design, we're going to be off on the estimate by a certain range. So contingency is going to apply to those kind of unknowns. Secondly, you're going to get in the field and you're going to have changes. You're going to have problems occur. You're going to have delays. And those are the other things that contribute to using your contingency. Is it an appropriate amount of contingency? We believe it is. It's appropriate for the due diligence on a program of this size to carry a contingency. This was about $255 million on a program of 2.75. That's a little under 9%. It's not a huge number. Some people would claim it's skinny. I think it's appropriate given how you're procuring the job and the fact that $1 billion of this roughly is going to be under a public-private partnership that you're going to lock in early. So again, on an annual basis at least, we recommend you're going to relook at the financial plan, relook at where your costs are, take a look at your contingency and see how you're doing and be able to adjust as you go forward.
This is a really good opportunity, I think, for the Finance Committee to gain a better understanding of the 275 or the 3.1. So if there's any questions, I think it'd be really an excellent time to bring those out now. We've got the information in front of you. If there's any additional questions, it'd be a great time to ask that. Mayor.
So when are we going to draft in here, and Chuck's here, it's kind of the reason I'm asking the question is I think Minnesota's asked to draft a bill for a certain amount of money. Is that 39, 38? I don't remember the number.
I'm not sure either.
39
million. So just for North Dakota legislative body, could we sometimes at least have an asterisk on it or something so they know that? Because that would be important. Because one of the questions they always ask is Minnesota starting to put some money in, and that I think would be a positive.
John just clarified it's 39 million for the current bill, and there would be a bill later to add to that to bring to the commitment. You'll notice on both of the pie charts, Minnesota is counted in the financial plan and in the estimate for 86 million total.
When Minnesota has money for 39 million, I don't understand how their system works. Is that for 1 year or is that for a biennium?
I don't know. Perhaps Mr. Redlinger can say more about the Minnesota process.
That'd be a biennial budget, so that would be approved unless there'd be another special bonding bill that would happen in, say, the second year of that biennial. But yes, that'd be for the 2-year period. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for Martin?
And just Tony Gehrig is flying right now. That's why he's not here. And I think he's one of the ones that had questions about the finance. So maybe, Martin, if you would be so kind to visit with him about what you presented today. So
happy to answer any questions anytime.
Thanks. Anything else on that? I don't think we have to take any action on that report. Just perhaps one thing on the budget, the annual budget. Look at Mike and Martin. The plan for that is to get that presented or completed by what date?
Yep. Actually, at your next meeting on March 27, the idea would be to come back with your stand-up budget for quarter 2, quarter 3, and beyond. So that was the goal, just to try to take a bit of delay, figure out where we end up with litigation over the next month, and then determine our budget.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Is there any other business for the Finance Committee? Any other business? Hearing none, our next meeting will be March 27th, 2019. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion second? Second. We are adjourned.